Hi there. Just a quick note before we get into today's episode. Super exciting news. We have launched brand shiny, spanking new social media channels across all platforms dedicated to the Hunger and Heart podcast. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and of course, YouTube. If you enjoy the podcast, please do follow us on your social media platform of choice. We will be releasing full episodes as well as clips, teasers, trailers, carousels, the works, you name it. Don't miss out. All right, let's get on with the show.
We went and had a cup of tea with him and we talked to him about walking to the South Pole. We tell him what the goal is of walking to the South Pole unaided. He looked at us in the eye and he said, "Is that it?" What he said next, I'm pretty sure this is close to word for word. And this was from a long time ago and it stuck with me. And this is, I had this random request one day by a friend, Rob Hamill. "Can I ask a favour of you?" He said, "Look, hey, I'm managing this other crew and they're about to do another rowing race. But one of them, the poor guy's just had an injury and he can't continue. We might be needing someone else." And I said, "Yeah, okay, sure." And I said, "How far is it?" He said, "Oh, it's about 5,000 Ks. And I said, "Well, it seems like a lot longer than the 5 kilometres I've just done." And I said, "Well, how long does it take?" And he said, "It's probably about 6 weeks. So he said, "It's across the Atlantic Ocean." And I kind of had this sphincter tightening experience. I said to Rob though, "Well, when does the race begin?" And he said, "It's in 3 weeks. So fast forward, 3 weeks, Kevin and I are at the start line in the Canary Islands and we're about to sort of take on this huge big adventure. Midway across the ocean, and it would end up going okay and we won the race and got the world record. One of the things we ended up doing midway across the ocean was, well, how would we apply this type of thinking that we have together to a different campaign? And we said, well, if we're ever going to do another thing, it sure as hell isn't going to be hot, and I sure as hell don't want to be on top of the ocean. So that's where Antarctica came from.
Hello, my name is Kyla Colvin, and welcome to Hunger and Heart, a podcast on the intersection of wild ambition and fierce compassion. My guest today is Jamie Fitzgerald. In 2003, Jamie and fellow adventurer Kevin Bigger set the world record for rowing across the Atlantic Ocean, completing the 5,000-kilometer journey in just 40 days. In 2007, Jamie and Kevin were at it again, this time becoming the first ever Kiwis to reach the South Pole unsupported on foot. Jamie has taken his approach to extreme performance and applied it to a wide range of leadership contexts, including leading the culture and training of 6,000 Rugby World Cup volunteers in 2011. In our conversation, Jamie shares the specific approach that his first high school rowing coach used to get the best out of him. We talk about the 3 characteristics of peak performance, and he shares how Sir Edmund Hillary forced him to really up his game. So here you are, my conversation with Jamie Fitzgerald. What's your origin story? How did you get into adventures? How did Jamie Fitzgerald, mountain climber, sailor guy, come to be?
I was born on a big sheep farm in Gisborne, an isolated community of the east coast of the North Island, and really flood prone, the headwaters of the Motu River, and people think you must be, something like that must make you pretty steely mind and really hard-nosed, determined. And you need to be in any sort of environment like that. And coming from a farming background, you have to be practical. You have to be, focused on the job, right? But at the same time, growing up with a single mum and 2 older sisters, you also realize that you cannot achieve anything without keeping an eye out and having genuine care for the people around you. One day my father went to Tauranga to buy a sheepdog, of all things, but instead bought a kiwi fruit and avocado orchard. So here we are, suddenly we're in this completely different region. We're growing up. We were really busy focused on stuff that families focus on when they're living on an orchard or in a farm. It's a lifestyle for the whole family, right? Everyone's got to do their bit. So we were not sort of going out doing camping trips and things. When I got to high school, I found myself, my parents separated. I found myself then having the opportunity to fall in love with the sport of rowing. Now, rowing in New Zealand at secondary schools is a pretty big thing, and it becomes your family, it becomes your community, and you find new role models through that. I was never out camping or climbing mountains or doing the great walks. During my holidays, I was off at rowing camp holidays, rowing school regattas and things like that. Um, but that became the basis for where I learnt about things like um, teamwork, things more. It was in a different context from the farming that I learnt things about. Once you commit to doing something, you better do it. If you don't pull your weight, actually someone's going to be suffering. And it's not just about you. This is a sport about other people because, if you don't do your bit, well, then the boat might go in circles. And that's not a good thing.
Everyone I know who does sports, there has to be a coach who makes it awesome. Did you have that?
Absolutely. This one particular coach, his name was Tim Richardson, and I've kept in touch with him since. So, here I am, a 14-year-old boy, and I suddenly fall into this tribe, if you like, this community of a bunch of ragtag boys from an all-boys high school, and we could go any direction, right? And so we talk about values of being driven or having empathy or being, having care, with boys who are trying to figure themselves out, right? Full of testosterone, growing, and it's so influential. And I'm coaching now an all-girls high school rowing team. So, it's a real thrill to see in these adolescent years to see these teams, these groups, these tribes kind of form together. If I think back to when I was a teenager, what I learned back then, everything that I've done since, I'm grateful for what I learned in those years, and from people like Tim, who we're all role models, right? But it's what we're role modeling, and this combination of both being driven and caring for his athletes, knowing that it wasn't just sport, it was creating life lessons. I'll forever be grateful for that guy.
What did he do that showed you that he cared?
Um, what did he do? He was pretty um, unapologetic for the standards that he believed we deserved, and he was unapologetic for encouraging us to think that that should be an expectation of each other, and so it was a ceiling not that we should aim for as if it was some sort of goal in the future, but it was, this is what we should expect to be just a day to day. This is the way we do things around here. Don't think of this as being an aspirational thing. Let's start with an A, for example. Let's start off with the attitude that we can be A plus, and we're going to diminish from there, but we're not going to let ourselves. Let's not think of ourselves as, an F, and we've got to work towards being an A. And I think that in itself was kind of a philosophical leadership approach from him. And the other thing I loved about Tim was, in terms of coaching and rowing, on face value, it's a pretty monotonous kind of one track kind of sport, right? You've got an oar or two and you try and pull on them as hard as you can. But he almost had this attitude of, we're only limited by our imagination and creativity for how we can keep people engaged. So the small awards or the creative ways of running different training sessions and things, just to keep, teenage boys engaged and excited, was really, really important. And I've applied that to all of the things I've done now, not just coaching and rowing, but the other cultural alignment, or a few years ago in 2011, I had the chance to look after the training for all of these 6,000 Rugby World Cup volunteers around the country. Here we are trying to create a uniquely New Zealand experience, right? Let's gamify stuff, the task at hand. Let's gamify. Let's know that there might be switch on moments, but during the switch off moments, let's do an awesome job of that as well.
Okay, I love this so much. Two things. The first thing I heard you say, he was unapologetic about the standards that he had for us. And we'd started an A instead of starting an F, or start an A plus and can move back from there. I want to share the way that like filtered and landed for me and test whether it's consistent with your experience. The way that lands for me is this idea that champion being a champion is not what we win, but what we do. And if we think that being a champion means we've won the regatta, then we have to wait to win the regatta to be champions. But if we realize that it's what we do, then we're waking up every day going, I'm a champion today. What does a champion do? A champion goes out and practices as hard as they can and supports the team and cares and cleans up the sheds and does all the things that a champion needs to do. And it's that shift from um, it's that intersection maybe between identity and behavior as opposed to outcome.
Yeah. Yep. If that's what sunk in, then I'll take that any day of the week because I'll bank that. No, but you're right. We, if I think about the rowing squad or the group of students that I have the privilege of getting to know at the moment in Wellington, where I am, the school motto is ad summa, so aim for the highest. But it's not about the outcome that you're just referring to. It's not about the result that we need to wait for. And then the actions of other people are going to define whether we are a success or not a success. It's not about that. It's about, how do we achieve our own personal best? How can we be the best that we can be? And one small little thing that we've done is, and I've applied this in a whole bunch of different contexts, but for the rowing or for these teenagers at the moment, at the beginning of the season, we get all of the hand paint and we put it on our hands and all of them, and it's in the gym, it's in the weights room. They're literally putting their handprints and marks next to the values that they've defined and the descriptors that they've defined as what we stand for. And this whole wall is covered in these amazing, different colored handprints. And that's where we're doing our weights. That's where we're doing on their rowing machines. Throughout the whole season, there are these visible artifacts of them saying to each other, for each other, this is what is special about us.
My heart just grew 3 sizes. There's a trope almost of a big corporation that generates, uses ChatGPT to generate a list of values from on high and chucks them on the wall, and they mean nothing, and everyone just ignores them immediately. And what I heard you say just then is these kids have created these values for themselves, for each other, and they put their hands against it. Like there's a connection to them and a meaning to them that makes them real versus superficial. And that actually led to the second kind of observation/question that I had for you when you were talking about your coach, which is you're talking about 14-year-old boys full of testosterone. I've got 3 stepsons, 18, 16, 12, and they got a lot of energy and they're enthusiastic, they're committed, they're motivated, and they really have to be kind of channeled. And I love what you said about your coach being able to use creativity and imagination to invite kids to channel their energy positively, as opposed to being mad at them for expressing their energy in other ways.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And you can't cage enthusiastic, energetic young people. You can't put them in a cage and only release them when it's time for them to do their craft. We need to let them express themselves in a whole bunch of different ways so that when we ask them to apply themselves in a certain, kind of craft like rowing, that they're happy to do that and they can flourish there as well. So yeah, no, I just, it's a bit of a social experiment, to be honest, and that's what it sometimes feels like being a coach of a sport that's pretty consuming for 6 months of the year. But it's massively rewarding when I've felt like I can bring myself to it as well, that I'm not feeling like I have to kind of pretend to be something else or pretend to be something that I think the school expects of me. I feel like I can be myself as well. And this has been a really the coaching of another sports team has been a really cool thing for us to talk about. The same principles have absolutely applied in some of these other, um, I don't know, more extreme ultra endurance type events as well. Bringing yourself to it, but finding ways to know that we're creating value every single day in pursuit of the outcome. But you can do that. You can do that creatively. You can do that with imagination and flair and personality. And for me, that's what's kind of kept the engagement going, because otherwise it would feel a little bit monotonous.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna come back to, so you're rowing. You've got Tim Richardson. He's awesome. You're inspired. You love it. What's the journey from there? And how did you get into these kind of extreme adventure activities?
Yeah. So fast forward a few years, and I'd done some rowing overseas. I'd managed to row for New Zealand at the World Champs, and some interesting experiences through some of those different campaigns. What I learned from those few years after leaving school, and having not yet at that point done any university study, I realized the importance of feeling like you were able to. I realized about the importance of how rewarding it can be when you really feel like you're following your passion, and that you feel like there's an environment for you to thrive and really be your best. And I probably l- learnt, and I realized that maybe some of my passion to find that extra 0.5% was starting to wane with my rowing. But I'd learnt from rowing the importance of, if you're going to do something, make sure you do it with passion, make sure you do it with energy. And I had a love for rowing still. So that's when I made the decision um, to take on some study at the management school at the University of Waikato. I managed to carry on doing some rowing against Cambridge and Oxford from England, and that was heaps of fun. And I had this random request one day by a friend, Rob Hamill. Um, he said, "Hey, look, Jamie, you've just done some rowing. You've just done a 5 kilometre race against Cambridge University, and congratulations, you won that. Well done. Can I ask a favour of you?" And this is when I'd been doing some study. I was getting through my management degree. I was a little bit older than some of the other students because I'd done this farm fencing and thing for a while. But I said, "Yeah, sure, Rob, what do you need?" Thinking he was going to ask me to babysit one of his kids or mow his lawns or something. And he said, "Look, hey, I'm managing this other crew and they're about to do another rowing race. But one of them, the poor guy's just had an injury and he can't continue. We might be needing someone else." And I said, "Yeah, okay, sure." And I said, "How far is it?" He said, "Oh, it's about 5,000 Ks." And I said, "Well, it seems like a lot longer than the 5 kilometers I've just done." And I said, "Well, how long does it take?" And he said, "It's probably about 6 weeks." And I think the race against Cambridge was about 16 minutes and I was exhausted. And I said, "Is this like a big one? Is this a big rowing race?" He said, "It's across the Atlantic Ocean." And I kind of had this sphincter tightening experience, really not sure what he was asking of me. And I said, "Well, who's the other guy in the boat?" And he said his name's Kevin Bigger. And I'd never met this guy in my life. It turned out he would become one of my superheroes. Uh, I said to Rob, though, "Well, when does the race begin?" And he said, "It's in 3 weeks." So I kind of freak out, but that lesson that had been drilled into me from a young age of, um, if there's an opportunity in front of you, uh, and if you're unsure, just don't immediately say no. And if you've got an opportunity in front of you that you think could be exciting, be curious about it. You know, this could be something special. So I went and did a little bit of research, and I asked a few people, and I ended up saying yes to it. So fast forward, 3 weeks. Kevin and I are at the start line in the Canary Islands, and we're about to sort of take on this huge big adventure. One of the things I learned from that campaign, and one of the things I certainly learned from Kevin, was this power of, people nowadays call it, what, diversity of thinking. You know, um, this guy, Kevin, he's a bit older than me, but a massive brain on this guy, former Boston consultancy advisor. He'd worked at a bunch of these big multinationals. The way that he looked at a campaign, sure, this is a rowing race, but actually this is an expedition, or it's a challenge of attention to detail. Some of these huge big campaigns like rowing across the ocean, it's, yes, you're doing a lot of rowing and every second counts, but it's about how disciplined can you be about a lifestyle that you're willing to have for 6 weeks. And Kevin's attitude and the way he thought about it, it really blew me out of the water. So I'd probably done more rowing in my career, in my life, than he had, and maybe that was some of what I was able to bring to the team. But our differences, I found, made it a massive strength. And ironically, midway across the ocean, and it would end up going okay, and we won the race and got the world record. One of the things we ended up doing midway across the ocean was, well, how would we apply this type of thinking that we have together to a different campaign? And we said, well, if we're ever going to do another thing, it sure as hell isn't going to be hot, and I sure as hell don't want to be on top of the ocean. So that's where Antarctica came from.
Okay. Like, first of all, Rob Hamill, good on you, Rob, if you're listening to this. Like, hey, you've just done a 5K race. Would you like to do a 5,000-kilometer race in Silicon Valley? They often talk about 10x thinking. Here's Rob with 1,000x thinking. I love it so much. Second of all, I love this premise of diversity of thought and of where you got to with it, which is, hey, this way of approaching tasks or challenges is effective. Could it apply in other challenge contexts as well? I do have to ask, because of course you and I have known each other for almost 15 years now, because you spoke at my TEDx event way back in 2012. Was this the race? Was this the race where there was a bit of a storm early on?
Yeah, it
Tell
sure
us that
was.
story.
Oh, it sure was. So in our race, if I think back to it,
Because
long,
honestly, Jamie, sorry, the way you just said it is like, yep. And then, Kevin and I got together and we had some different thinking and it went great and we won the race. Ta-da! But it wasn't quite that easy, was it?
yeah, no. How do I explain it? So the short answer is, at the end of the race, a crew that came second thought that we went too fast for that was humanly possible, and we must have cheated. And so there was a protest by another crew. Now, what I found, Kevin and I had just done this race. We're there in Barbados. We're having a few rum punches. It turns out they make quite a lot of rum in the Caribbean, so we were doing a bit of partying. And then suddenly we hear that there's this protest of a crew that's not that happy with us. What made it sad for me was it was another couple of Kiwi guys. Who I admired because they'd previously already rowed the ocean. So they were brave enough to want to row the ocean twice, which I think is, kudos to them. Now, what it turned out was to solve that, and no one else had any issue, like no one else kind of made any protests, any of the other 18 or so crews, however many there were. The result, the complaint was based on we must have used a sail somehow to push us across the ocean as fast as we did. It all kind of got sort of turned into nothing. The pain in the neck was, in order to solve the complaint, they applied, I think, ocean sailing rules to when it would be all wound up. And that meant that they had to wait for the final crew to arrive home at the finish line before they could, resolve the complaint. Now, it took us 40 days to row the ocean. I think the last place crew came home after about 60 days after that. I can't quite remember how long, but it was a long time. So it was a pain in the neck for me having to wait so long for them just to say, look, this is a load of rubbish. And the protest is nothing. And they could easily define that by looking at the data that was taken from every boat every 12 or 24 hours. And it turned out that we were going pretty well when the conditions were rough. And we weren't the crew that went the fastest when there were tailwinds or anything. And aside from that, kind of dismissing all of the protests, for me, it also confirmed actually how Kevin and I were supporting one another when times were tough. Because, and there's probably 1,000 catchphrases to sort of try and describe this, but sometimes when the conditions are calm and favorable, it's everyone can try and be at their best, right? But sometimes when we think we're making the least progress, that's when we're challenged, and teams who really understand each other and how to solve problems, that's when they're really put to the test. And there were a few times during that race, particularly when we were faced with big storms, that we may not have made huge mileage, but we certainly didn't go backwards. And that was because of just the way we worked together. And that proved to be the difference in who won and who didn't win the race.
So this was the story, because I remember your talk vividly. It's not my role to put words in your mouth. And I would love to hear it from you again, this story. And the story that I remember so vividly is that you get started on the race and then you hit a storm. And when the storm hits, you're faced with a decision, with a choice. Do we keep rowing or do we put out the sea anchor? Am I remembering this correctly?
Oh, wow. Your memory is, I wish I could have your memory. But yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. So we start off, the sun's shining, the water's amazing, and you've got these crews that choose their very slight different angle of direction. Everyone's got their own strategy of how to get 3,000 miles across the ocean. Uh, and a couple of days in, we get hit by this big storm. And the natural sort of assumption is a big storm is trying to push you back towards the start line. Waves are pushing you back, currents, the wind is trying to push you back. Put out the sea anchor like a parachute, put it in the water, and save your energy, everyone. Just let the storm die down and save your energy. So that's kind of the standard operating model in those circumstances when we'd learnt about it from others. So we tried that for 5 minutes, but these currents and wind you're holding onto the ocean and it's kind of dragging you back towards the start line. So Kevin and I, after 5 minutes, we said, that's the pits. We just don't want to go backwards. So let's keep on rowing. So we row and we row and we row. We didn't travel anywhere, but and for a guy, remember, that had been involved in the campaign for only 3 weeks, this was pretty unmotivating. I could have been back in Hamilton at what was the Hillcrest pub back then, having a whale of a time. But no, here I am in this tiny little boat made out of 12 mil plywood, and into the storm. So we had no idea what others were doing, though. 20 hours later, or 30 hours later, whenever I remember, but there was a conversation with Rob, and everyone at home had the privilege of being able to log in and see 19 lines travel across their computer screen and have a blast, right? You could see it where everyone's gone. And I remember us chatting to Rob back at home, and he could see the computer screen, and he said, "Fellas, this is amazing. This is so good. What you guys are up to?" And we're saying, "Rob, this has felt miserable. Just how far behind are we? Because we haven't moved anywhere." And he said, "Just keep doing what you're doing. Everyone else has clearly put their sea anchors out. They've kept them out, and now you're in front because everyone else went backwards." So look, it's day 4 or day 3 by now. We carry on rowing. We see whales, dolphins, a lot happens in the next 5 weeks or something. But we cross the finish line after 40 days, 5 hours, 31 minutes and 27 seconds, I think. But we win the race, get the record. The distance between us and second place was about the same distance as what we'd made up on that day 2. So when we think about when sometimes we think we're making the least progress, we're actually making the most.
I need
Yeah.
to I have to highlight this story because you say it like it's that. I mean, that's your life. That's just a thing that happened to you. I just want us all listening to imagine we're out in the ocean with a guy we've known for 3 weeks. our previous experience is winning a 5K race, which was was it on a lake? Was it on a river?
Yeah, it was on a river in Hamilton,
On a
followed by the
river in
most
Hamilton.
amazing ball, the party that night.
Okay. Our previous experience, we won a 5K race and then we got to go party. Now we've trained for 3 weeks. We're out in the middle of the ocean. A storm hits. We're getting pushed backwards and we're being asked to row as hard as we can just to stay in the same place. And you don't know what's happening with the other teams. And just for all of us listening, I just want us all to like just sit with, imagine how demoralizing that would be, how tempting it would be to just go, why, what's the point? I mean, first of all, kudos to you because like it's really extraordinary. And then second of all, is that the thing that you think got kind of cultivated from Tim and from the way that you were brought up on the farm? Is that something you were just born with? Like, how do we get there to where we all have that kind of resilience and grit and perseverance that you have? It's extraordinary.
Oh, well, I think there's three things that come to mind about that. The first thing is I don't want anyone listening to think that I wasn't out there, and I don't want anyone to think that we were out there going, "Hey, I wish the waves were bigger. I wish it was windier. I mean, this is so good." In the moment, we didn't have the rational knowledge, knowing that it was paying off. So we were suffering. Like it was, and emotionally, we didn't want to. We wanted the flat seas. We wanted the pina coladas. Like it wasn't easy. So I'd hate for people to think that we were smiling our way through that. Um, the second thing would be, yes, I think I can credit the buckling down and grit from a lot of those earlier years of discipline and working hard if we're going to achieve something, and that comes from the rowing or from the farm. The third thing I just wanted to mention, though, is this superhero Kevin. I've got no problem when there is a time for us to really buckle down and work hard, and I can be pretty stubborn-minded in that sense. And if it needs to happen a long time, well, then so be it. Kevin can do that. He can also, at the same time, switch into gear this brain, this analytical thinking of his, to start doing the maths in his head of, okay, well, which direction, if we were to change direction slightly, would that have a positive or negative effect on us? Okay, what's the rate in which we're drifting back if we were to drift back? And let's do the maths on if we wanted to have a 3-hour rest, how much would we lose? What if it was a 6-hour rest? Okay, well then if we have no rest at all, is there a net benefit for us? So like this guy is doing these calculations in his head at the same time. And I had 6 weeks or 40 days, 5 hours out there to be able to learn that style of thinking. Now, for the last 15 years, aside from being involved in different, I guess, projects or working with different corporates around the world, I've largely been self-employed. To be able to have learned from someone like Kevin, when being self-employed, you have to wear about 8 different hats on a single day, right? So, being able to switch on that hat, which didn't previously come naturally to me, has been just so special to have learnt from someone like Kevin. And then leveraging his thinking or perspective when we would go into the next campaign, like the South Pole, and then I could sort of bring in my slightly more extroverted perspective when we needed to find sponsors for $500,000 and things like that. It was really special. So those three things came out from that sea anchor story for me in terms of personal kind of reflections.
Amazing. Tell me about the South Pole. What was the ambition? What was the aspiration? And what happened?
Yeah, so we came back from the ocean, and we had this taste for big projects. I think deep down we knew that we didn't want to row another ocean. Like I don't think we would have then gone from the Atlantic onto the Pacific. But my personal passion was I really loved the idea of trying to take on a goal in what felt like a foreign environment, but apply what we thought was a proven process about the objective. And when I say a foreign environment, I don't mean geographically, like from ocean to ice. I mean something that felt new and different to me. And from a professional point of view, I'd had this fencing business. I then went into financial services and banking. So I worked for a large New Zealand bank, and then I'd eventually do some overseas as well. So taking my management degree into a different environment and that setting, that's what was inspiring to me, because I wasn't sure if I had what it took to succeed. So that was from a professional setting, that's what excites me about trying something new. From an adventure expedition point of view, yes, we came back and we thought, what could be something that that we could sink our teeth into? And we knew the reality of, I guess, the financial reality of any big expedition costs money. And so there has to be a degree of newsworthiness to it, if unless you can self-fund it, which for the South Pole we weren't going to be able to. So by chance, we'd already met Sir Edmund Hillary, the late Sir Ed, through our Atlantic crossing. He was the patron of our trip for that. We did a little bit more research, and after speaking to Ed, we then realised, well, hold on, it's coming up to the 50th anniversary since Ed had driven tractors, these Massey Ferguson tractors, to the South Pole. Wow, that's really special. We need to celebrate that. What an amazing, piece of history that we can bring to the surface and make people remember. We then realised that no Kiwi had ever walked from the coast of Antarctica to the South Pole unaided and unresupplied. So, dragging everything you need from the coast of Antarctica. So we said, well, why don't we try that as a way to celebrate and highlight this anniversary of Ed's? We then did a little bit more reading and we said, hold on a second. Yeah, sure, no Kiwis have walked there unaided, but no one from anywhere has ever walked from the coast to the South Pole and back again unaided. So no dogs, no horses, no tractors, but there and back unaided. And we said, to celebrate Ed's trip, well, let's try that. Now, I say that kind of casually. That ultimate goal that we'd come up with, that came up only after we'd spoken to Ed about it. And we went and had a cup of tea with him, and we talked to him about walking to the South Pole. And would he be happy to be the patron and things? And you're a bit nervous when you go and see a guy like Sir Ed. You shake his hands. He's like, if you go to a supermarket and you grab a big bunch of bananas, that's like shaking hands with Ed, right? So we tell him what the goal is of walking to the South Pole unaided, to be the first Kiwis there to celebrate his trip. He looked at us in the eye and he said, "Is that it?" And like, you don't know what to say to the guy. What he said next, I'm pretty sure this is close to word for word. And this was from a long time ago and it stuck with me. And this is, I think, such a relevant point for us all to remember. He said, whatever you do, make sure it's the most demanding but rewarding thing you can imagine. And I thought it was what we'd just told him. But that's when we went away and did the research and found out no one had ever walked there and back unaided and unresupported. So using some of this kind of, I guess, the methodology around performance we've applied with others, but if I think about the greatest imaginable challenge, Kevin and I went away and through the conversation with Ed, that became the greatest imaginable challenge, walking there and back unaided and unresupplied. So it turns out there's a reason why no one had ever done that before, and we were going to find out. But
What happened?
Well, yeah, so we got there to celebrate Ed's trip. After 52 days, dragging 160 kilograms, from the coast, we get to the South Pole on the 2nd of January of this particular year, and it was really special. It wasn't a huge high five moment. I remember, Kevin and I shaking each other's hands once we got there. We probably gave each other a hug. But we'd had a lot of time to think about it. It wasn't like an adrenaline. It wasn't a 30-second jump out of a plane and stuff. But we were there, and it was really cool. We never got to do the return trip. which we had planned for and trained for so long. Two reasons for that. Of the 1,200 Ks, I'd been walking with torn hamstrings for the last few hundred Ks, and that was becoming a bit of an issue. We were worried that if we were to rush back to try and meet the deadline of this private company that had flown us in, we were worried that maybe if my injury had got worse, we may have needed to call in for some help. And if that was the case, we were worried that it might dampen or dilute the celebration of Ed's trip, or that might become the story rather than Ed's anniversary being the story. So we wanted to finish on a high. So long story short, we were the first Kiwis to walk there unaided to celebrate Ed's anniversary. And I guess at that point, we were the first people to drag 160 kilograms there unnecessarily, right? Because we didn't do the return trip. But I can laugh about it now.
I just, you know what made me laugh, the reason I laughed when you said about the torn hamstrings is how understated you are. You're like, for the last several hundred kilometers, I've been walking with torn hamstrings, which a torn hamstring is a major, major injury. And then it was becoming a bit of an issue. Like, what?
Yeah.
You're dragging 160 kilometers across the snow. When you got to Pole, did they give you a cup of tea? I think they're only allowed to give you like a cup of tea, and that's about it, right? They can't help you.
Well, you're right. Yeah, you're right. So it's we were met by some really really friendly, amazing scientists. The work that they're doing, what a special bunch of people, and what a special sort of type of psyche you need to have to survive down there. Not just through the summer where it's 24 hours of daylight, but there's a smaller crew that stick around during the winter as well. So yeah, they did come out, and we got, because we had made the decision not to do the return trip and maintain as unsupported, we could go in and we had a look around inside the base and that before we left. Amazing facility. I remember Kevin actually walking in, and that was when it was the first time I'd seen a mirror in 50 or 60 days, and so that's when I realised just how much weight we'd lost, looking in the mirror, which was a bit scary. But it had been minus 40 outside. And then there's this 4-story building at the South Pole that's kind of air conditioned. And so it's like 20 degrees or something. So Kevin passes out. So we're going from minus 40 to 20. They're showing us around. Kevin falls to the floor. But the amazing thing is they're pretty well set up down at the South Pole for first aid. And so I think he gets wheeled off on a stretcher and gets given an ECG or a CAT scan or something. But he comes right, and yeah, that's. Oh, and the crazy thing was my memory of that. So we arrived on the 2nd of January that year. If we had arrived 3 days earlier, it would have been New Year's Eve. A rock band had been flown into the South Pole for their New Year's Eve party, and they were having a huge big party that year. Now, the reason I say that is at the very beginning of our trip, we got dropped off by this tiny little plane in the middle of nowhere with these 2 sleds. We get thrown out of the plane, we hitch onto our harnesses, and we start walking. It turns out we were dropped in the wrong location. It took us 3 days to get to the start line, to where we were meant to be for our campaign to actually start. So I sort of think maybe we could have arrived 3 days earlier and arrived to this amazing New Year's Eve party at the South Pole, but it wasn't to be.
I feel like this is a bit of a theme with you where, you go on the sailing thing, you keep rowing instead of the sea anchor. The other people go back 3 days, you win by 3 days. This other place, you get started in the wrong place. You have to make up 3 days. You miss it 3 days on the other end. Like there's a lot of kind of fate and destiny in your adventure.
Oh, you're so right. I think if there's one thing I've learned from any of these sort of long trips I've done, is that the transition from kind of normal life to expedition lifestyle routine, there's always a few days of messiness. After I got back from the pole, I did this trip down the Te Araroa Trail, and every 100 kilometers, so from Cape Reinga all the way down, it's farmland, rivers, beaches. But I didn't want it to do it just on my own or just for an expedition. Every 100 kilometers, a different group of about 6 or 10 at-risk high school kids joined me. So for their 100 kilometers, we'd be mountain biking, caving, climbing, hiking, whatever, for their 4 or 5 days, and then a different group, and then a different group, then a different group, which was amazing. And I teamed up with Project K and Graham Dingle for that. And I still remember in the first few days of that one, we were coming down from Cape Reinga, and I've got some memories of vehicles being stuck in the sand and other things. But after 3 days, everything comes right. After 3 days, it's all good.
I love it. Okay, so now you've talked about you and Kevin had this experience rowing across the ocean. You wanted to apply it to a different type of challenge, not just geographically different, but just a different type of challenge. And you developed this methodology for performance. And I feel like you've touched on lots of aspects of that methodology, but do you have a way to sort of summarize, like, what is the approach in a way that can help us in non-Atlantic Ocean rowing or Antarctic traversing contexts apply some of the principles?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two things I'll mention. The first thing is around, I guess, my belief on performance or strategy in itself, and the second is the methodology question, and another really important role model I've met and worked with along the way. The first thing is, when I think about strategy or performance, um, there are two things that come to mind, and it relates to two things. The first is, performance is ultimately about how do we organize or manipulate known resources in order to get an expected result. So if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. We kind of know that from the Cheshire Cat. And so it's about how do we organize things to achieve an expected result. That's pretty simple. But the other thing about performance, it's about choices. What do we say yes to and what do we say no to? And often we need to recognize that saying no to things sometimes says more about us than when we say yes to things. So, so we need to know what we're trying to achieve, and that we have to manipulate and figure out a bunch of stuff to get there. There has to be a plan. But we also need to be really accepting that there need to be choices to achieve it. And so being deliberate with decision making and owning decisions along the way. That, as a philosophy, we just have to all be really comfortable to say that once we're clear with the goal or the values of what we stand for, there are going to be decisions. And sometimes we're going to have to say no, and that says more about us than when we say yes sometimes. So that's quite, I guess, my approach to that. The second thing relates to the methodology question. And I met this guy called Mike Pratt. Now, he was the dean of the management school when I studied at the University of Waikato. Now, what I didn't realize that back then was that this guy, Mike, along with a few others, they were sports nuts, and they really loved different sports teams, and they really wanted to travel around the world and see their favorite sports teams. And being kind of clever people, they thought, well, hey, why don't we put some sort of academic research spin to it, and it'll give us a reason to go and visit them. So they said, why is it that some sports businesses are sustainably successful when others aren't? And this is keeping in mind that players come and go, right? And yet some of these organizations are continually successful. And so they traveled around the world, and they looked at the Chicago Bulls and Man United and Team New Zealand, the All Blacks, and a whole bunch of others around the world. So that's the work that they'd done. And I met up with this Mike Pratt, and we ended up doing a lot of work together for organizations around New Zealand, which had been using that methodology, but also a revised version of it, of the research, looking at organizations, so non-sporting organizations, including a big piece of research that Mike had driven, looking into manufacturers around New Zealand, organizations that were sustainably creating really good value throughout their business model in pursuit of, their own goals. So coming back to the methodology around, and in a really high level description of what it is, have we got clarity and alignment of who we are and what we're here for? And here for being, the creation of value for others. What's this overarching purpose, the reason we exist? Applying purpose then to their practices. So what are all of the ways in which we're operating through our business model or operating model in an expedition setting? What are the different parts of, the campaign, and are we applying our values and our purpose to it? Being curious, so the sustained measurement or the sustained emphasis on, are we looking for more opportunities rather than just getting bogged down into the sort of the standard grind, rather than thinking that we're into a flow state? Let's try and apply some creativity to that. So we're always, I'll say, challenging the process, but that sounds negative when I say it like that. Are we embracing creativity or curiosity to say, how might we keep improving? And then what gets us to the top of the next mount, the first mountain may not get us to the top of the second, right? And so let's not, it's like finishing the Atlantic and saying, hey, let's just make a carbon copy of that and just bolt it into the next thing. Well, no, let's try and reinvent ourselves. So, well, let's build on top of it. So that's kind of what we've been doing, and that's probably my approach to all of these kind of campaigns I've done, whether it's professional or adventure. And it's been a real blast. I think if I was to jump straight back to my time rowing as a high school student, or even the first campaign doing the Atlantic rowing race, if I never back then had words like personal purpose or, the philosophy of our, team. Like, I don't remember back then ever having that stuff. I think what I had was gut instinct. That was probably as best as I might have had. I think that terminology is a lot more commonplace nowadays. Even with secondary school students, there's just a lot more awareness of these things. Um, I yeah, but I think back then it was just gut instinct. I really don't know if I would have changed anything though. I'm really proud of what it was like back then. I just didn't have a label for it.
Oof. There's so much in there. I love it so much. We do a lot of work with the Crusaders, and you talk about a sustainable high performance environment. Um, you know, with the All Blacks and the Black Ferns, we talk about win percentage, but with the Crusaders, Super Rugby's been going 30 years. In 30 years, we've been to the finals 19 times, won the championship 15 times. It, by that metric, it might be one of the most successful teams of any sport anywhere in the world. And the work we do with them is like to understand what are the characteristics that make them so reliably, consistently successful over such a long period of time with different coaches, different players, different uh, management teams, et cetera. And really, the four things that it came down to, we run this Crusaders leadership program to communicate these things. And the four things that it comes down to are number one, culture, building this sustained culture of belonging. Number two, this premise of play to your strengths. So rather than, we're going to focus on all the things we're not doing well, we're going to focus instead on how do we maximize the assets and capabilities and resources that we have. Number three, person first, player second. And so there's a piece there of like, someone shows up and they're struggling, we got to tackle their struggle and, like see them as a whole human before we can get the most out of them as a player on the field. And then the fourth one, which I really love, is coach as servant leader. And so the
Mm.
premise of the coach is not there. We're not there for the players to please the coach. The coach is there to create the environment for the players to thrive and perform.
Oh, yeah, I love it. I mean, it's that sense of family, the sense of people as a group of humans, um, being the core before things like business model or operating model. Um, I think that's, we can't achieve anything with a process alone. There's going to be influence. There's discretionary effort, especially at that high performing kind of level. So how can we possibly expect, that extra 0.1% for performance without, at the core of everything, that sense of family? So I think that's a no-brainer.
And that's discretionary effort that you talk about. That is the thing that when you're in the middle of the ocean and you're getting pushed backwards and you're rowing and going nowhere, and the only one who gets to decide whether you keep going or not is you.
Yeah.
That's the discretionary effort that gets unlocked when you're at the final 15 seconds of the game and you're up by 1 and you have to just keep holding on to that defense or whatever it is. The only person who gets to decide whether you keep pushing until after the final whistle is you. And that's that. There, no coach in that moment can force you. It is only you that gets to decide that.
When you're in the deepest part of that well of despair, and you might be thinking, is this actually ever worth it? If you haven't been, if there isn't that sense of empathy or love or appreciation or knowing that someone else has got your back, I don't care what people say, without that sense of community or family or knowing that someone else has got your back, you're not going to give that absolute last 0.1%. So I think coming back to where we began the conversation, you can be as fiercely competitive as you like, but if you truly want the very best out of others or yourself, I think it's the rest of that environment as well.
You just brought tears to my eyes. What a perfect way to bring this conversation full circle. And thank you for sharing with me the folks who have had your back in that way. Tim Richardson, Kevin Bigger, Mike Pratt. Like, what a gift to have these people in our lives who are all in on our team, ride or die, and to help bring out the best of what we're capable of.
Oh, that's so special. Thank you so much for having me.
It's been absolutely fantastic, Jamie. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Man, for someone who does the kind of extreme adventuring that he has, Jamie Fitzgerald is such a chill dude. A couple of takeaways for me from that conversation. First of all, what a storyteller. I mean, I love listening to him talk. I feel like I could curl up on the couch and have him sit in an armchair by the fire and just talk about his adventures for hours. I love that story about the rowing, that their refusal to go backwards turned out to be the exact margin that they ended up winning the race by. And I also loved the way Sir Ed challenged him to think bigger. Wow. And finally, I love how generous he was with sharing his insights and his understanding and all his lessons learned. What a dude. All right. A huge thank you to celebrity speakers for their support of this episode. If you really want to keep your audience on the edge of their seats while also delivering them some powerful leadership lessons, Jamie Fitzgerald is your man, and celebrity speakers are the ones to reach out to book him. Thank you again for listening. Please do let me know your feedback. You can reach me on hello@kylacolbin.com. And if you enjoy the show at all, the greatest gift you can give me is like, subscribe, follow, let the algorithm know. Thanks again, and see you next week. Hunger and Heart is brought to you by the Crusaders Leadership Program. Whether you're coaching under fives or a professional team, we all want the same thing: to build a culture of trust, to get the best out of your people, and to grow players into leaders. The Crusaders Leadership Program lets you get up close and personal with some of the greatest rugby legends of all time. People like Sir Wayne Smith, the Professor, Sam Whitelock, Kieran Reid. You'll connect with a global group of ambitious, caring coaches from a range of codes and backgrounds. And most importantly, you'll gain skills and techniques to drive impact and outcomes for your team. The Crusaders Leadership Program is a 2-week high-intensity virtual experience. It is delivered exclusively online, accessible from anywhere. Hunger and Heart listeners get 10% off the full price of the program. Use the code HUNGER at checkout. You can find out more about the Crusaders Leadership Program at crusadersleadership.com. That's crusadersleadership.com. Hunger and Heart is created by BOMA and the entire BOMA team, including Tito Bernal, Rach Engel, Hannah Hudson, Johanna Coxon, and me, Kyla Colbin. Thanks for listening.